Hello, everybody. Welcome to GM Joel's Chess Week Recap on ICC. I'm Grandmaster Joel Benjamin, and this week I have a special tribute to one of America's all-time great players. One by one, all the heroes of my childhood pass on. In the last few years on my show, I have honored Larry Evans, Robert Byrne, Walter Brown, and Arthur Bisguier. To this list, we must add William Lombardi, who died recently in California, a bit before his 80th birthday. Lombardi's career was full of achievements. He became, I believe, the first American since Paul Morphy to claim a world title when he won the World Junior Championship in 1957. Playing over the games, it's clear that the competition wasn't as tough as it is now, or perhaps even when I was a junior in the early 80s. But no matter what, 11-0 is an incredible achievement. I can't think of anyone winning a world title at any level with such a massive perfect score. Let's take a quick look at a simple but iconic win from that event. And this is Lombardi's game against Matthias Guruzel, and I got to believe that this gentleman is best known in chess for losing this game, and it's kind of made the rounds, but it's kind of a cute combination. So we'll have a look at it. Lombardi playing black, and I believe actually all the games I'm going to show are with Lombardi playing black, and I don't know what that means exactly. Maybe he was especially good at counterattacking. All right, so we have a Nimzo Indian. And knight c6, this is a move that I've played many times, but usually following up with a d6 strategy. And now, after a3, we transpose to a position that's usually achieved through a slightly different move order. And Lombardi goes for a pawn sacrifice for quick development. The Nimzo Indian in general is not a fast developing of the king side opening, so white is paying more attention to the queen side, and so black often has some opportunities like this. Nowadays, in this position, most of the games white plays e3, a much more prudent move than the capture, and then he's ready to develop this bishop. But I don't know the state of the theory of this in 1957, but white takes his pawn on e5, and after bishop f5, now white has black has some threats of discovered attack. There's a couple of games where white has played g4 here, throwing in g4, bishop g6, I guess, to be able to develop the bishop quickly. And also there are a number of games with queen b3, which has a more immediate threat to take the pawn on d5, and is a little bit more forcing in that respect. Guruzel plays queen a4, and that's showed up in some other games, but with almost no success whatsoever for white. As after castles, black is building up a nice initiative, and it's going to be hard for white to catch up in development. Guruzel plays bishop e3. He plays a, kind of, I would say, rather naive continuation. He's trying to control some squares in the center and figures that he can prevent this move d4 by using the pin. And he doesn't really want to castle, I suppose, because then after knight comes to c5, he's worried about knight coming to b3, but pretty much the same thing happens after rook d1. I would say now, many years later, it's very, very obvious that this is just not going to end well for white after this nice queen sacrifice. Takes on f2, king d1, rook d8, king c1, and now to come into the present, if we turn on a chess engine, it will show many winning moves for black. Lombardi played one of the more interesting ones, a simple, quiet move a6, really just to take away the square b5 from the queen, and with a huge threat of knight c5. So after a6, Um, there's not really a whole lot white can do. Knight c5 is a big threat. The queen is actually trapped, so he tried to bring it back to b3, and probably he should have tried maybe queen c2, but I think he's going to lose a lot of material there. Knight c5, and now the kicker, knight a5, threatening to mate on b3, and a couple possibilities here. If b4, knight b3 check, king b2. Okay, there's a fork on a4, but it might be even better to do it this way. Rook d1. This is kind of funny. Rook b1 check, king a2, and after knight c1, white has to give up the queen for a knight anyway, and black is not only up a lot of material, but white can't move anything. And then also knight d2, this is cute. Black takes on d2. However, white takes back, he gets forked either this way or this way. Yeah. So the game ended e4, trying to block out the bishop, and after check, white resigned, as if the king goes to b1. The black rook is going to come into d1. I suppose if it comes, it can come right away, even because if king comes to c2, this is mate. So a short game, an easy game, but kind of aesthetic. So that was part of Lombardi's big success in the World Junior Championship, and since then a number of Americans have won that event, but he was first. Okay, now Lombardi played many times on the U.S. national team with great distinction. He played in 7 Olympiads, winning 3 individual silver medals, 1 gold, and 4 team medals. He also played for the U.S. in 7 World Student Team Championships, earning 2 gold medals, 1 silver, and 4 team medals. In every one of these events, Lombardi made a plus score, usually a big one. Now, perhaps his best team result was in the 1960 World Student Team Championship in Leningrad. The World Student Team was a very important event for players under 26 years of age. It still existed in my youth, and I played in 1981 and 1983, though I think the name was changed to World Youth Team because the tournament really had nothing to do with actually being enrolled as a student. It was just under 26. Nowadays, every nation fields a team comprised mostly of players under 26. So it became superfluous, and I don't think the event actually exists anymore. But back then, it was quite meaningful. Now, in Leningrad, Lombardi posted an amazing 12-1 score, highlighted by a win over future world champion Boris Spassky. All right, let's take a look at that one next. Okay, so Spassky was playing white in this game, and it was a Sicilian. So Najdorf, sharp stuff. Back then, of course, the theory wasn't as developed as it is now, where, of course, with the computers and databases and everything, and tremendous amount of work. But back then, they were kind of making a lot of this up as they went along. And this knight bd7 was a popular move, I think, in the 60s, and kind of went away and came back recently. And bishop c4 is one of the key moves. But I think nowadays they tend to bring the queen to b6, and back then queen a5 was a popular move. There is a downside that after white gets the king out of the center, sometimes knight d5 becomes a tactic that black has to watch out for. And here we have e6. So I think queen a5 is mainly to get out of the way of bishop takes e6 sacrifices. So Spassky castled kingside. Most games white's castled queenside, but he goes kingside here. And now a3. This is a fairly rare move. The idea is to maintain the bishop on the board on a2, that if it retreats to b3, black will have opportunity to trade it off. So white is valuing this bishop very greatly, hoping, I guess, to get a lot of pressure on e6. But it is a tempo spent and gives black time really to deal with it. So first, Lombardi kicks the bishop. And, whenever you have this relationship with the bishops, if it goes to h4, then knight takes e4 comes into play. So he chases the bishop away, kills the pin. And also the knights coming in are slightly awkward. Knight e5. And now the queen gets out of the way of knight d5 tactics. Of course, if black castled, knight d5 would be possible. And also black is looking to put a knight on c4. Okay, so white decides to guard that square. Queen e2. And Lombardi plays b5. There are alternatives. He could play, one idea is to play bishop to d7 and then to follow up with rook c8 rather than b5 to put a knight on c4. And if it's traded off, he can keep taking with pieces. And after queen e2, another possibility is that black can go attack this bishop right away. This dark squared bishop is a very nice piece to get rid of for a knight, especially when this pawn is sitting on e6 and not e5. So there aren't any weak squares that you'd want to occupy, so you want to trade off a knight. It's just a good position for bishops. So if the bishop moves away, black could try d5 here. Nice timing, because it threatens this little mate on h2, and that will immediately free black's position, and probably black even has a slight edge. Lombardi played b5. This move is perfectly fine. And now Spassky decided to chase this knight right away. Now, normally what we might expect a move like rook a d1, because white would probably want to be able to retreat the bishop on e3 when it's attacked, so he doesn't get it traded off. So I think that would have been a better move for white. Spassky, in playing f4, maybe was anticipating knight c4, but now knight g4 comes, and white has to give up the bishop, because if he moves it away, black can go and attack it because of this pin. King h1 is another move that white would have wanted to get in sometime soon, and here white actually just would have to go back. So the bishop is going to have to stay on e3. All right, so white plays h3, which also strikes me as a bit of a strange move, because black wants to take this bishop anyway. Maybe king h1 would make more sense. So takes, castles. And I guess the feeling is Spassky feels that he's going to get something going in the center right away, but Lombardi beats him to it. And here we see white starts to pay for not getting his king off of that critical diagonal. Really, I think, kind of naive play by Spassky. And Lombardi exploits it. Takes, and now d5, setting up the bishop coming to c5. All right, as always, computers kind of ruin these games, these old games, just a little bit, as they point out things that nobody noticed. But this is not too bad. But it does suggest that white could have maybe ignored the pawn and played something like king h2, because after d4, white can take on e5, and if queen takes, then take with the rook. And if bishop d6, then just move the knight away and sacrifice the exchange, and white would come out okay. But probably black can play a little bit better. And instead, after king h2, maybe play rook a e8. And if f takes e5, bishop c5, queen f4, trying to stay on the pawn, but black will kick the queen off the pawn. Queen f3, rook takes e5. Or white could have this position with the knight f6. Either way, black is developing an initiative and has a better position. Queen takes e5 was well answered by bishop d6, queen e2, and now the bishop goes in a different direction, doesn't take the pawn at f4, takes on a3, undermining the queen side. And here Spassky really needed to be kind of looking to bail out, and he could have played knight takes d5. And black can take that knight and go queen a c5 check and pick that up, but the bishop is hanging on a3. Another way is to play queen a7 check, and then next move bishop takes b2. And black would have an advantage, bishop opposite colors position, but black has a very nice passed a pawn, which can help him in the endgame. But still, that's what white had to do, because after knight d1, it gets worse. And actually, here probably the most accurate move would be to play bishop c5 check, and then queen a5, and then rook a8, to play it in that move order. Because after rook a8, white could perhaps play queen d2, as the computer indicates, and better chance of survival. But after queen f3, now just came a very cool tactic, bishop check, and an unusual fork. That a pawn did not seem that meaningful, but in taking it off, it exposed the bishop to attack and then the rook. And now white is in a position to lose material. So Spassky brought the knight back to c3. I don't really see what else he can do. And now is an interesting moment, because I was looking through one of my chess-based files to find games on Lombardi, and in the database, I found the game gave the move bishop b4, and then with all the moves that happened in the game, and then white resigned. But here white could play, let's say, bishop takes d5 with a disadvantage, but not losing. And I thought, why didn't black play b4? And then I checked some other sources, and I saw b4. So I'm pretty sure that Lombardi did, in fact, play b4. It makes a lot more sense, and in fact, it wins a piece. Knight takes d5. He just takes the bishop. And the king side is a little bit weakened. Of course, there's this very aesthetic double pawns. Queen c6, queen c4, and that's the last move. If queen f6, black can take this pawn at f4. His king is quite well sheltered. Actually, he can play for a mating attack with the queen and bishop, just simply piece up. So Lombardi absolutely getting the best of Spassky, really kind of dominated him, I think. And that was very interesting, because that snapshot in time, how strong Lombardi was. We know how strong Spassky was to become, and he would eventually be world champion. All right. Now, it may be a bit surprising that Lombardi never won a U.S. championship. I looked it up. That seems to be the case. But keep in mind, his career overlapped with Bobby Fischer, who was 6 years younger. They, of course, grew up together as proteges of the legendary chess teacher Jack Collins. Lombardi is often thought of as Fischer's coach in those early days. Of course, he was younger and gone through things sooner, and he taught Bobby quite a bit, it was believed, in those old days. And of course, Lombardi was Fischer's second many years later in Reykjavik in 1972, and by all accounts, Lombardi was instrumental to Fischer's success in that match. Now, Lombardi finished second in the U.S. Championship to Fischer in 1960-61, but shortly thereafter decided to study for the priesthood, and his amateur status in chess no doubt hindered his ability to win the national title, as well as other international successes in chess. But he was for many years among the top handful of American players. I would like to take a look at his win in the 1969 U.S. Championship over another American legend, Paul Benko, who now seems like the only member of that old guard who is still among us. Let's see that one next. Okay, so Benko opens with c4, and it starts out in a type of English, but we reach this position, which can come from many different move orders, and at this point, we could see a position with either side having an isolated pawn, um, but in this case, white waits with a3, and black usually also waits with a6. We still can go in any direction, and here white decides to first of all not right away try to take on d5 and perhaps head for isolated pawn position, but to pick up a tempo on this bishop, of course, by playing a6, black made a useful move rather than losing a tempo, developing his bishop. In a lot of games, black plays an early d4, which is often good for equality, but we did not see it here. So it looks at first like Lombardi will play with the isolated queen pawn, but since Benko takes his time in making that exchange, Lombardi decides after white has spent a tempo with his bishop that he will take. And so he basically gets an extra move on what he would have had if he had taken a move earlier. So Benko places the bishop most aggressively on d3 rather than e2. And I guess both sides are thinking about attacking on the king side. But somehow Lombardi, playing black, is the one who managed it. First, he chases the queen off of that diagonal backed by the bishop. And now knight g4. So he's trying to get the jump on him here. Also, he's not waiting for knight to come into c5. And, well, perhaps knight e4 could be a good move, although the knight is not ready to go into c5. I don't know if black has any ideas of pushing f5, try to get control squares, get stuff going. But Benko plays h3, and he thinks perhaps that he's got a little trap here, because after knight e5, white grabs a pawn. But it's actually not so great for white to take this pawn, because now we have a position where this bishop is bearing down on the king side. White has no defenders, and also quite significant that black has a rook in the game before white has mobilized any of his. Now Lombardi follows up with a very nice move, f5, cutting off the queen from the king side and really threatening to press on that side of the board. Now here, to stay in the game, Benko's continuation would be forced. He needed to play queen g3 here, and if bishop b8, then another forced move, f4. And in this case, the game would be fairly equal. Lombardi could play e5, and absolutely he has compensation for his sacrificed pawn. Everything looks good except the h pawn is gone. No, nothing isolated or anything. Two bishops, but it would still be a tight game. Benko had to do that, but he made a mistake. Okay, so first Lombardi starts with bishop b8, and that chases the queen away from the king side and also puts the bishop on a very nice diagonal, and it's about to get better. Also, the queen coming to d4 means that potentially black has his tempo on the queen. Okay, so this is where the computers come in and start to mess things up a little bit, because they indicate that Lombardi had an even better move than he played. He could have tried bishop takes g2 here. King takes queen g5. King can't use the dark square. King h1, queen h5. Of course, king f3 would be no improvement. Black could do the same thing. King g2, and only now rook c4. And if the queen moves away, then rook g4 will mate. So this was an even bigger splat. But Lombardi's move was also quite aesthetic. Bishop f3, very cool move. And if white doesn't take it, queen g5 coming. So he takes it, and now rook c4. All right, so if the queen moves, and we could see, something like queen g5, queen h4, and that leads to mate. So white has to sacrifice the queen. He could have done it a little bit better way. Knight takes b5, for instance. Sometimes not obvious to see this type of move. because if rook takes queen, knight takes queen, white has a little bit more compensation than he got in the game. And if pawn takes knight, then white can sacrifice a piece. Queen g7 is still much, much worse, but maybe not completely lost. But still, actually, Benko got a little bit back in the game, and I believe that both players start to get into very bad time pressure. It was very common in those days. Benko was notorious, and I think Lombardi was also in very bad time pressure a lot. People were quite deep thinkers then. Lombardi maybe could have finished this off a little bit more easily. F4 might have been a good move to play here. I think rook d8 is basically okay. King f7. He could have also played g5 right away, but he waits a little bit on that. And now he plays g5. But after takes, he should show a little patience with king g6 because the white position is going to break apart anyway. The knight can't be maintained on d4 for very long. Black will get e5 in. After e5, Benko missed a little bit of a resource here. He could have played knight f5, and after queen d2, first get the king out of the way so he doesn't lose the rook, and then after queen takes bishop, rook takes c4. And in this position, black is up a queen for a rook, but white's taking a lot of pawns. Black is running out of pawns, and there is some possibility of a fortress. I mean, the computer actually has black's edge at less than one pawn. I don't know if that's accurate assessment or not, but certainly Benko could have tried to stay in the game. But I think he really, really just didn't have any time on the clock, and I think the game was moving very fast at this point. And here, black is just winning a piece. c3 is a big threat, so he gets to take the bishop anyway without giving up that f5 pawn, and also the white knight is passive, so black just kind of cleans up, and he's winning the knight. Benko played this, but I believe his flag fell as he played it. In any case, after the king moves, the white's position falls apart. So a nice win there. I mean, I think the best part of it really was the vision to sacrifice that pawn, that h7 pawn, and see that after f5 he was going to get a big initiative, and followed through with it. So a nice win there. Now, Lombardi was a complicated person. He could be cantankerous, and he always spoke his mind. He took perceived slights personally and deeply and could hold a grudge forever. So he wasn't the easiest man to get along with. But he had a highly positive side, too. He was a man of great charm, and many players and fans recount personal stories of Lombardi's humor and kindness. He was a larger-than-life figure, and in any case, his chess accomplishments speak for themselves. I could just tell you personally, when I was a teenager playing in the Lone Pine tournaments in California with all the grandmasters, myself and my partner in crime back then, Mike Wilder, we used to scrutinize the games of the grandmasters to decide which players we should worship, who were the true strategic geniuses. And I do remember that at one point we decided that Lombardi was God. And I'm not even sure what game he played that made us think this, but we were deeply impressed by his grasp of chess strategy. And so I can tell you that from personal point of view that I had a deep respect for how he played the game. All right, this all brings us to the elephant in the room. Years ago, Lombardi was chosen for induction into the U.S. Chess Hall of Fame. He became the only person before or since to decline that honor. I think back at the time, the induction occurred at the U.S. Open, at the annual USCF luncheon, and there was really a great mistake on the part of the USCF that at that time the policy was that the inducted player would have to come on his own expense. And of course, Lombardi objected to that. But okay, of course, he was right about that, and he was told subsequently that they would take care of that. He had would have all his expenses paid for, and I think in various years there were many overtures. He was, I think, offered that he would get, a little bit of money in addition, especially because as he got older in his the last few years of his life, he was pretty destitute and was having a problem finding a stable home to live in, and there really did need some help. But unfortunately, he was very, very stubborn about things. He felt that the USCF had done him wrong, which probably to some extent is true. He was never very well remunerated for his chess work, which was really true for pretty much all players of his generation. And but he it hurt him very deeply, and he never forgot about those issues. The Hall of Fame is now run by the U.S. Chess Trust. It's not, the USCF isn't really involved in it. I'm on the Hall of Fame committee. I can tell you there's been a lot of discussions about Lombardi, and it's unanimous view that he should be in the Hall of Fame. He is not currently in the Hall of Fame, but it's certainly not because anybody doesn't want to put him there. But he has stated many times since that original attempt that he does not want to be inducted. He may have been saying that until the very end. So it's unclear at this point whether he will have that formal distinction added to his legacy. But whether he's in the Hall of Fame or in with a disclaimer or whatever happens, it is very true that he has a rightful place among the giants in U.S. chess history. And all this was really as only a semi-professional player. Who knows what he would have done if he had devoted his whole career to playing chess. Maybe he would have starved. Who knows? But he was in the priesthood for many years. Eventually, he did leave. I think in the early '80s, he married and had a child. But he lost the best years of his chess career. That he was not putting all his time into it because he was not a full-time player. But one of the great chess players, and he did come to the U.S. Open this summer, and I did see him last time. He was a very friendly mood, very happy to see a lot of the people that he had done had battles over the chessboard with over the years. But it seems that he had a heart attack in the last week, and he passed away. So Bill Lombardi, dead at the age of almost 80, but his chess games will be remembered as we go into the future. All right, that about wraps it up here. I'm Grandmaster Joel Benjamin. I hope that you enjoyed the show today, and I hope you will join me next time on GM Joel's Chess Week Recap on ICC.